Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I am again joined by Rainlord to finish part two of Chinese hypersonic missiles. It's a pleasure to have you, Rainlord.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, like Christopher said, this is the part two of my presentation on the Chinese hypersonic missile program. And today we're going to discuss a little bit about the technology as well as the current Chinese hyper missile arsenal and how it affects naval warfare. So, like I said in the last episode, here, however, I will make small changes in that I will, in the technical part, I will only cover the hypersonic terminal tracking, because I think this is the most relevant technology to discuss, and that will give us more time to discuss about these two subjects.
All right, sounds good.
So here I'm gonna dispel a major myth of hypersonic system is that a lot of time when you hear people criticizing hypersonic missile is that terminal guidance is impossible at hypersonic speed. They are right in a way, because when a missile fly at hypersonic speed, the air become ionized plasma, and this is opaque to a lot of electromagnetic waves, which means that you cannot send radio wave or communicate through it. And that's why many people say that the hypersonic missile doesn't work, especially against moving target, because to do that, a hypersonic missile need to either slow down in order to track a moving target, therefore make it vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles, or they have to rely on initial navigations, and that means they can only hit fixed target. And because of this, many people say that anti-ship ballistic missiles are just propaganda, because it's absolutely impossible to acquire at terminal guidance.
Okay, so then what would you say that they are?
I would say that they are right in a way, but not completely, because the plasma only make very hard to get tracking and signal out, but they are like a lot of technical way to get through it. So first, if you want to have to communicate through the plasma sheet, the plasma is actually not opaque to every band of radio wave. Actually, it depends a lot on temperature, flight condition, altitude, and etc. So usually for hypersonic missile, the K-band wave can be used to communicate through the plasma sheets of the missiles. And the other thing you can do is to put the communication satellite in the rear rather than the front of the warhead, because in the rear the plasma is less intense, so that allows communication. And by doing so, not only can the warhead receive tracking data from the satellite, so it can achieve satellite guidance, the warhead can also talk to each other, so they can network together and to find the optimal flight path or attack angle from this. However, this kind of guidance still rely on satellite, and you don't want to do that because those signals can be disrupt, and in a World War III scenario, a lot of satellite will get shut down. So you need something from the missile itself to track the target.
Okay, now this is the glide vehicle, which is after it's separated from the main missile, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So in order to achieve terminal tracking without satellite, you have to be smart about it. So one way to be able to achieve terminal tracking at hypersonic speed is actually to have something to disrupt the flow of plasma. So usually one of the way is to release fluid to kind of open a window into the flow of plasma to allow your tracking radar to take snapshot at the target, because you're flying so fast, you don't need really a constant feed from the radar. And just taking snapshot will allow you to adjust. And this is one of the methods to release fluid. You can also do it with electromagnetic field to disrupt the plasma, but what I read is it's not as effective. So fluid is usually the way to go. And with this method, you can even disrupt the plasma enough to achieve optical tracking, well, infrared tracking at Mach 10, which means that if a well-designed warhead using those technology can have both radar and optical tracking at Mach 10, as well as sharing data.
Okay, so is the glide vehicle itself still going Mach 10 once it separates from the missile?
Once it's separated of the missile, its speed will change depending on in maneuver, but Mach 10 is the terminal velocity, a typical terminal velocity of the current anti-ship ballistic missile that China uses.
Okay, and so by disrupting the plasma field, you can get optical guidance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, optical guidance as well as real guidance. So let's say that in 2023, the current Chinese hypersonic missile technology, pretty much like the plasma sheath communication technology, you can consider it like very much a core part of the hypersonic missile tech. So it allows radar and optical tracking at hypersonic speed, which enable a Mach 10 terminal velocity against moving target. And it also allows communication between the warheads and the kill chain, which is the drone, satellite, to receive data, as well as sharing data between warhead for optimal attack path. So basically, and with this combined, the current Chinese anti-ship ballistic missile only require a approximate location of the carrier to locate, network, and coordinate to attack. So we don't need the exact position. So if the satellite know, for example, in this several kilometer area, that carrier is there, the missile can simply be launched to that approximate area, and they will be able to find and attack the carrier by themselves.
Okay, so what you're saying is, if I'm getting this right, when you launch the missile, you have, I guess what you might say are passive or directed guidance, where there's a human operator sending signals to the missile. But then at some point it becomes active and can then search for a target on its own?
So basically how it works, you have like drone and satellite and everything that locate a ship. The missile which will be launched towards that position, and during all that time, the missile will communicate with the satellite, with drone, with the whole kill chain to constantly get updates, and as well as talking to each other. For example, one missile can fly higher to act like a leader to better acquire the target, and other missile may attack from different angles. So it's like it's kind of a smart system. I would say like it's not really a human that control this, because this whole process happened in less than in like 10-15 minutes. So it's very much a automated network thing. So it's a very high tech intensive stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, that's pretty much the core tech that I really wanted to cover, because this part is not many channel covers about it. So I feel like it's important to explain this before we go forward. So that's pretty much the core technology about the hypersonic missile. Also a little slide here just to show like how some different way to locate the carrier. Those numbers are kind of out of date, but I just brought it together to give some idea. So basically, what a satellite slash missile, when their radar or basically see this, and you have like different drone that tells you where the missile are.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So that being said, this time we can go into a bit more detail on the current anti-ship ballistic missile that China have, as well as their numbers. So that's are the current anti-ship ballistic missile that China have. By anti-ship ballistic missile, I simply mean that they are able to hit moving target. They are not only there to attack fixed target. There's estimated range. The range kind of vary depending on the sources, but the ballpark is there. And here I gave the number of as well as the number of platform. Usually for like land-based launcher, you have like one missile on the launcher and 1 or 2 reload that go with it, and as well as 1 or 2 extra missile at the base. So with this, you can kind of get an idea how many missiles the China currently have. And here is a map to get a general idea of the area coverage.
Right, and even the shortest range missile is well within range of Taiwan.
Yes. I would say that those missiles, none of these missiles will be used in Taiwan, because Taiwan is actually so close to China that rocket artillery can cover the entire island. So there is actually no need to use any of, not even ballistic missile, I would say, against Taiwan. It's just so close, just so close.
Right, but what I meant by that was any naval engagements within the disputed Taiwanese waters would be in range.
Yes, yes. Every naval engagement will be in range of the even the shorter range anti-ship ballistic missile, and if you're within like 500, you're in range of the tactical missile, which are much cheaper. And if you're within 300 kilometers, you're actually within range of rocket artillery, and that's the place you don't want to be, because the rocket artillery are very cheap, and you're going to run out of defense before they run out of the missile. So just a quick overview on this missile. So when people talk about the Chinese anti-ship ballistic missile, the DF-21D is the one that people most talk about it. However, this missile, like I think I also mentioned in last episode, is kind of already outdated. So they have around 100 launcher available, but they are not really building much more of this missile, because this one was operational in the early 2010s. So it was like the early part of the Chinese anti-access area denial capability. The main land-based anti-ship ballistic missile is the DF-21B, which is more accurate, have a better trajectory, which means that it's harder to intercept, and it has a much greater range. And it has like over 200 launchers, and they are also more getting built.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course we had these two, the well-known DF-17. We have which have like around 150 launchers, and the DF-17, the range, we don't have exact information yet, but I would say is in the ballpark of 2,000 kilometers. And there's this two DF-27. These two I think they share the warhead. They just have like different size of boosters, so that they have different range. There's currently two idea of what DF-27 does. One is that it has like around like 5,000 kilometer range, so it's basically like a better version of DF-26. And the other view is that it's basically like a much longer range anti-ship ballistic missile. It has like a smaller number, but it's like you can see it pretty much as a long range spare support that can hit ship up to Hawaii.
Okay, now on your trajectory, you have MARV, HGV, and SKIP. What do those represent?
So MARV, those are maneuverable warheads. So they pretty much have like a similar warhead. So they pretty much follow a ballistic trajectory, and they glide a bit in the end, and they hit target. So it's very similar to a normal a normal ballistic missile. So they are vulnerable to interceptor like the SM-3, as well as the SM-6. With the skip, they bounce on top of the atmosphere to extend their range and make interceptor like the SM-3, which intercept ballistic missile in space, very difficult because you kind of have to know where they bounce each time. But they are still vulnerable to SM-6, which is designed to hit a missile in the terminal phase. And the HGV, which is a hypersonic glide vehicle, so they launch and they glide the entire way. They are pretty much immune to the missile like SM-3, but they are still vulnerable to SM-6, but to a lesser extent than missile with skip trajectory. Because like I said in last time, the fact that the idea that hypersonic missile is completely immune to all interception is kind of a myth. They are just very hard to intercept, and it will cost you much more in terms of interceptor to intercept the same cost of missile. And considering that missile themselves are quite expensive, you can get the idea.
Yeah, thank you.
And then here we get something interesting. So here is our launched version of YJ-21. This is pretty regular. It's pretty much a YJ-21 strap and a bomber that can launch a very long distance. But this is more interesting because this is actually a ship-based weapon. And what the difference that make is that all those one here, they're pretty much it's very long range, but they're still kind of defensive because you're bending and land to attack. But this one, you're kind of bring the fleet with you. So this actually, I would say, like is become like an active. It can actively engage the U.S. Navy in blue water. So this, I think, the bigger game changer is this one.
Okay, and by that you mean that it had a long enough range to reach out to second or third island chain targets?
I would say that we got a map here. I would say that with the DF, except for the DF-21, every other missile can pretty comfortably reach the second island chain. So if we go here, as you can see here, the DF-26, it can hit the entire second island chain, and the other missile can hit most of the first island chain and part of the second island chain. So the presence of those missiles pretty much make the entire island chain strategy kind of invalid, because island bases are very vulnerable to missile attack, because in the mainland you blow up an airport, like the repair material get drives in and you can repair the airport. But islands, you can do it to a much lesser extent. That's why I said here that the second and first island chain are no longer defensible, and the Strait of Malacca is actually more. China actually control more the Strait of Malacca than the US. So that is basically the first consequence of those land-based hypersonic missiles.
So, for example, many people argue that if China went to war with the United States, the U.S. could just block the Straits of Malacca with the Carrier Task Force. What you're saying is if they do that, they're within range of anti-ship ballistic missiles, which would be very dangerous to the fleet, hence why the U.S. might not want to do that.
Well, economic and political problem aside, yes, if they try to blockade the Strait of Malacca, all this is under the firing range of Chinese missile. And remember, with this range, the launcher can stay 500 or 1,000 kilometers inside the mainland, which is very safe location, and still reach the US fleet if they ever try to blockade the Malacca or the second island chain. And the other thing that is good that you mentioned the carrier group is that we think those weapons as the only weapon that China have in that area. However, in reality, those hypersonic weapons are actually quite expensive, you should actually look at them as like very precision weapon to hit a very important target, like for example a carrier or an important radar station. However, China actually has a larger amount of I would say like air launch missile to cover to how do I say, to have sustained attack within the 4,000 kilometer range.
Right. So basically, the closer you get to China, the higher the stakes of attrition for any naval forces, which the entire point being is to deter that encroachment in the first place.
Yes, basically that. So before we talk about the YJ-21 and how it affects the thing in blue water, also here is the number of Chinese ships that carry those missiles. The number in red is the one that are being under construction and will enter service between 2025, which means that the number is building up quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to just touch a little bit on the balance of air power in this, because like I said, the missile, they are precision weapon. You have to we have to kind of cover a little bit about the balance of air power between China and the US. So we won't go into any detail, but I think it's a good idea to look at the numbers. So for a very long time, we've been saying that the US Navy is the world's second largest air force. This was true in the mid 2010. However, in 2023, the picture is kind of different, as you can see from the number here. So this table, I compiled the number of frontline capable fighter, which is like fighter jet that are modern enough, that are quite modern and that can fight in the front line instead of older fighter who have to stay in the air. And as you can see, the Chinese Air Force have almost double the number of frontline fighter than the U.S. Navy. When I say U.S. Navy, I actually put the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps aviation together. So this idea that the U.S. can just send its carrier and blockade the coast of China is a bit outdated.
Yeah, wow. With numbers like that. And of course, the other thing too, you're talking about total U.S. naval assets, which cannot be all deployed in the Pacific.
Yes, that's the total U.S. asset, and not just that, because this is the different fighters, and I also include some multi-role fighters. But the reason for that is because those are the fighters that China can afford to use against air target. And on top of that, China also have their strategic bomber and the fighter bomber to use against ships, because they can use this against air, so they don't have to use any fighter to carry anti-ship missions, because they can be given to them. Well, in the US case, the US fighter has to share between anti-air and anti-ship mission, which is used.
Also, because the fact that China can congregate all this air power in one location, it's technically better than 2-1 in any fight with the US.
Yes, in 2023, this is the current situation. So I'm showing this because I want to show that those ballistic, China is not just a one-trick pony. So the hypersonic missile is a powerful force multiplier, but actually China actually has a powerful conventional force to back up those missile systems. And here I just show another table. This is the comparison between the Chinese Air Force as well as the US Air Force. So here is the total of the US Air Force, and here is the US total, and here is the Chinese total of US versus US Air Force and US Navy. And just for reference, I give the number of frontline fighter that Russia has. So because I think even like last years, people are still putting the capability of Russia in front of China. I just feel it's not quite matching the data, so to speak.
It could be that this is just too new and analysts haven't had time to digest it.
Yeah, that could be the way as well, because China really started the massive buildup when they figure out how to build their jet engine. That's actually the big limiting factor. But once China figured that out, they pretty much really cramped out the building of the Air Force. So just one last slide about the conventional force. So this is, like I said, this is not our main subject. This is just some of the heavier missile that the Chinese fighter bomber, as well as the multi-role fighter and UAV can deploy. We don't really need to talk about them. Those are not really like cutting edge technology. They are quite most of those missiles are quite mature. I put an indicator like the NATO and Russian equivalent. So this is more like a slide if you guys are interested to look on your side. So if you have any comment.
No.
In that case, let's go to the next subject. So let's go back to our main topic. So this is the YJ-21. So here is actually a video that China released last summer, in summer 2021, I think, of the launch of one YJ-21 from the Chinese destroyers. So what we know about YJ-21, so is a ship-based weapon. So unlike the other hypersonic missile, this is the offensive weapon. It has a range of 1,500 kilometers. It has a Sanger ballistics, which means that it bounces the atmosphere like that, which complicate the interceptions. Is pretty big, but it's still a bit smaller than some of the Russian missiles. But we have to take into account that technology advances. The average flight speed is Mach 6, and terminal velocity is Mach 10. The warhead of this missile, I didn't get an exact data as I was searching, but from what I heard, the warhead is actually quite small, because a lot of this missile went to increase the range as well as the terminal velocity. However, when you hit a Mach 10, even a warhead smaller than 200 kilogram will be able to achieve a mission kill on a carrier. A mission kill is basically it damaged carrier enough so that it can no longer fight, but it's not going to destroy the ship. The ship has to go back to the port and repair. And just for reference, 200 kilogram is around the same kind of explosive power of a harpoon. And there is also an export variant. However, there's not much information on the export variant. So if I had to guess, the range of the export variant will be much smaller. I don't think the export variant will be able to bounce in the atmosphere. So it probably have less than half the range as the one that PLA have. And also the terminal velocity will be much lower, because like I said, like terminal tracking is the core technology of the missiles. And I don't think China is gonna export their best technology for sale.
No, probably not.
Also here, just a little comparison of how just having a Sanger ballistic increase the range. I just like to do a quick comparison between the YJ-21 and a missile with a similar dimension, the F-15. It has a bigger warhead, much bigger warhead. However, its range is only about the half of YJ-21's. However, this one follows a normal ballistic trajectory. So basically, it flies out, if you flow down, it adjusts a bit and hit the target. So just to show that the fact that by bouncing in the atmosphere, you can not only make your missile harder to intercept, you can also gain quite a lot of range.
Now, you said on the last slide that the Russian comparable weapon was larger. Did you mean a ship-launched ballistic missile?
No, I meant the Cold War era supersonic anti-ship missile that the Russians have. For example, the missile that the Kirov battlecruiser have, which is I think is
Yeah.
called the P-700. The P-700 is I think it has around the same diameter as the YJ-21. However, is 10-meter long, and is only have like less than half the range of YJ-21,
Okay.
and is only supersonic.
Okay. Thank you.
And that being said, to showcase the range, I did this comparison to show how this kind of missile impact naval warfare. So this is I'm comparing the range of YJ-21 versus FA-18 Super Hornet armed with Harpoon missile. So this is the range of both at the map, which means that if a carrier launches FA-18, it cannot reach like the combat range, the combat radius of the Super Hornet cannot reach the destroyer who is launching the YJ-21.
Yeah, by a pretty significant margin.
Yeah, and here something a bit closer would be with F-35. F-35 is a bit big, is quite bigger than the FA-18, so it carries more fuel. And if is armed with the JASM, which is the one that the F-35 carry internally, the two are quite close, but it's still like around 80 kilometer difference.
Right, and also the carrier has to launch the airplane before it can launch the missile. The destroyer can just launch the missile directly.
Yes,
There's less steps.
Yes, there's that step. The destroyer will just launch a missile, and the reason why I use this because that's the combat radius. Because this is the distance for the airplane to fly there, attack, and fly back. The airplane technically can reach the destroyer. However, you have to either I'll put it here. So in a fight against the destroyer armed with YJ-18 versus carrier fighter, to reach the destroyer, the carrier fighter, they have to do the following. So they either use larger missiles, which means that stealth fighter like the F-35 have to give up stealth, or the missile has to fly higher rather than sea skimming, because those anti-ship missiles, they are subsonic, so they rely on flying low to not being detected until too late. So if the missile has to fly high, they are more likely to be intercepted. Or they use air refueling, or the last thing I haven't added here is they go kamikaze and just fly further that they can come back.
Yeah.
And there's also that considering distance, IF-35 at cruising speed of Mach 0.8, you need to fly an hour and a half to reach 15,000 kilometers. However, the FG-21 will, with an average flying speed of Mach 6, only need 11 minutes to reach the carrier. And by the time the fighter reaches the destroyer, the battle will be over already.
Yeah, the destroyers are normally seen as smaller, expendable vessels, but giving them carrier killing capacities changes everything.
Yes, so we could say that this can be seen as a starting of a bigger change in naval warfare, but I would say it's less extent than carrier versus the battleship, because for a battleship there's basically no way for the battleship to reach the carrier. The battleship is a sitting duck, but with those hypersonic missiles, there's still some way for carrier to kind of compensate for it, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As we cover the missiles, so here I'd like to give some information on the two Chinese destroyers that carry those missiles, which is the Type 52D and the Type 55. So they are quite, I would say, like their size is quite similar to the ship that US have. The Type 52D is a bit smaller than Ali Burke, and the Type 55 is a bit bigger than the Type Canardoga cruiser. I don't know if that's the right if I pronounce correctly. So they both have like a dual band ASAR radar, and they both carry the universal launch system, which is a VLS system that China developed especially to be able to carry those hypersonic missiles. And their range is also comparable to their US counterparts. So this idea that China doesn't have a blue water ship is kind of a myth.
Right. And if I remember correctly, they also have more destroyers in the US.
No, the US still have far more destroyer than China. For example, China have currently 30 something destroyer, and the US have 60. And this is a more cruiser sized destroyer, and China have 8, and I forgot I think US has like 20 something cruisers. So right now US still have US still have an edge in China in the number of large surface non-carrier surface combatants.
Okay.
Yeah. So here is the VLS they both use, which is universal VLS. So they have a dimension of 0.85 times 0.85, and they go for different depth for different kind of ammunitions. And it's called universal VLS is because they are very versatile. So having a VLS that big is not just to put you can put one big missile, but you can also allow you to put a different variety of other missiles, like other anti-ship missiles, SAMs, and land attack. And you can also quad pack. Quad pack is basically you can pack like 4 smaller missiles in a big VLS. So it's called universal because it's quite versatile.
Okay, so it can be used in different ships and different designs.
Yes, basically that. And just to reference, the VLS and US ships, which is the Mark 41, is around 0.55 by 0.55 meters. So this is almost two times the size of US VLS cell, and is much deeper.
All right. So basically, you can get more for less.
Yes, but the downside is you carry less VLS cells in the ship because they take quite a lot of space. For example, the Ali Burke destroyer I think have 96 VLS, while the T-52D, by having those bigger ones, they can only have 64.
Okay.
Actually, speaking of T-52D, there's actually a funny story behind it. You know, this ship, there's actually an export variant of this ship, and the Saudi are actually interested in buying. And the funny story is that I heard that they complained that they want to remove 32 VLS, which is the one that in the middle, because their prince officers find that the ship doesn't have enough amenities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if they're gonna use those ships well. So there's another. So then, furthermore about the ship is, remember we talk about so far we talk about the missile and the ship. However, you remember that in the previous episode I mentioned that China actually has a slight edge over the US in radar technology.
Okay, I forgot that bit, but yeah.
Yeah. So just want to show it here. So this is like a timeline in US versus China in ship-based radar technology. For example, the first ASAR radar, that ship-based ASAR radar in US was in China was deployed in 2005. However, the first US ship-based ASAR radar is deployed in 2016, which is 10 years apart. And as you can see here, the first ASAR radar deployed in 052D in 2014 versus 2023 in Arleigh-Burke. Just a brief information is that right now, most of the US ship still use the SP1 PSAR radar, which is an older radar technology. Well, most of the Chinese ship has already been upgraded into ASA radar, which is a newer technology. ASA radar versus the PSAR radar is generally they have a longer range. They can track more target and are more sensitive. So that's what basically the point that as I said in the last presentation. So China is very focused on missile and radar. So this idea that if you have better sensor and a better missiles, even the rest of your platform perform less well, you would have an edge in combat.
Because you're better able to identify and acquire targets.
Yes, basically it. So I would say like the other subsystem of Chinese ship will be just good enough, but these two areas, the ship-based radar and ship-based missile, those are the two things that China trying to maintain an edge over the Western equivalent.
All right.
So now that we talk about the main Chinese combatant, I just like to show that the US is also not I don't know what the expression, not doing nothing. So they basically, if you can see the next generation destroyer of the US, if you compare with the Type 55, they are upgrading into SYY6 ASA radar, like the Type 55. They're around the same dunnage, and they are doing something different with their VLS cell. So instead of having the Mark 41 VLS, they are having 4 different radar modules. They can either be 34 old style VLS or the 12G VLS. We can hold a hypersonic missile, which means that the US right now is the US moving a bit in the Chinese direction.
Right. It's not that the U.S. is doing nothing, but China has invested in these areas ahead of the U.S.
Yes. And so just also then a few interesting comments and upcoming technology that can be included in future destroyers. So a better electric system to have more power available, and to have some electromagnetic weapon, either for the main gun or the close-in defense system, laser weapon. And one thing that is not talked about is electromagnetic VLS, so that they are more reliable than the one that need to use gas to launch the missiles out. So those are just some upcoming system in the destroyer that is good to take a look. And here, which we get to near the end of the presentation. So how, sorry. That being said, with those change with the change that hypersonic bring to naval warfare, how does the fleet of the future looks like? So we talk about since the destroyer can actually put out a fight against carriers, with China at least, we see this rise of destroyer flotilla. So you have the core fleet. You basically have one destroyers that take care of the long range anti-ship, as well as long range anti-air. You have a frigate that defend the destroyer. In the Chinese Navy, the destroyer pretty much take care of the long range, and frigate take care of the mid range and anti-submarine. The US and NATO use it a bit differently, but this is how China does to distinguish destroyer and frigate. And if you have internal long-term missions, you want to have a supply ship that go with the flotilla. And this is like the core fleet. And you can also add something else, some add-on into the fleet for different kind of mission. So for long-term mission, or if you add more ship, you may also want to add the nuclear attack submarine to protect the flotilla against other submarine, as well as adding some anti-ship capabilities. And actually, nuclear attack submarine is actually the area that China is quite behind the US. Right now, China only have 6 nuclear attack submarine, and this quite limit the deployment of Chinese Navy as a blue water navy, because if China send out their fleet, they need to at least 1 or 2 submarine to guard those fleet, and you cannot send out all your submarines. Some have to stay in port for maintenance. So since China only have 6 of those submarines right now, you can get an idea how many fleet that China can deploy at one time. And of course, if you want to have some amphibious warfare capability, you can add some amphibious warfare. So here I added the 3 type of amphibious warfare ships that China have. The O-71, which is a amphibious, which is a landing dock, which is they mostly support hovercraft landing. They have like 1 or 2. They have a few helicopter, but they mostly support like the landing force. The Type 75, which is a helicopter carrier with a well deck to support landing, and this one is actually quite interesting. This is a ship that is currently under construction. Is slightly bigger than the O-75. However, is a drone carrier. It has 2 electromagnetic catapult. So this is you can think as like a bit of a future of amphibious warfare, that instead of having a person piloting a fighter jet to support, you have like a fleet of drone, pretty much. So this is like the overall idea of like a destroyer flotilla, which is a much cheaper alternative to a carrier strike group.
Yeah, I can see that.
So just a little terminology from how Chinese distinguish destroyer and frigate. In Chinese, we actually call destroyer is actually have the verb to expel from an area, and that's why they take care of long range anti-ship and area defense. And frigate and corvette, they are translated as, if we translate in English, they are guardian ship. So the frigate guard a fleet or a ship, and corvette guard the coast. So this is just like how Chinese terminology kind of affected a bit of the rollout trip. And here, this is an image of an example of destroyer flotilla. You have a Type O-55 destroyer accompanied by a Type O-54 frigate, as well as a supply ship, and they are getting supplied in the middle of the sea.
All right.
So that being said, so here is one final thought and the future of role of carriers. So personally, I think carriers still have some role to play in the future, but probably not as central as before, because the destroyer now has already a very good anti-ship capabilities. And so basically the way that I see about the role of carrier is that they will still carry AWACS, because it's quite useful to have your eyes in the sky. They still provide a good air defense bubble. And I think the future carrier will be smaller. So that's kind of my view on how the future carrier might be. I don't know what you think.
I do think carriers will still be in use in the near future, and they probably will become smaller, because one is, are you going to deploy something that's so expensive you can't risk losing it? That was one of the problems of the German battleship fleet in World War I. It only really sailed out of port once to fight at the Battle of Jutland. because the assumption was it would be too expensive to lose, but they never got used. And so they lost the naval war in World War I because of that. Also, two, missiles don't negate other platforms. They raise the cost of using them. So in Russia and Ukraine, for example, and before that in the Yom Kippur War with Egypt and Israel, anti-tank missiles did not abolish tanks as platforms, but it raised costs to using them, forcing them to change their tactics. And so I think what the Chinese missile network will produce in the U.S. is force the U.S. to change tactics and be more cautious with the way it uses aircraft carriers. In the same way that Ukrainian shoulder ATGMs were used to punish Russian tank thrusts that were not properly supported, and now Russia is much more cautious in using its tank forces.
Yeah, and also like we showed here, the US is also taking advantage of the upcoming hypersonic technology. And also, I kind of forgot to add a slide about it, but you know the two Zombo that the US have, they are actually getting converted into hypersonic missile destroyer as well.
Yes, I've heard about the Zimwalt, which is initially supposed to be a mobile floating battery, has now been turned into a missile destroyer.
Yeah. And also, I think this flotilla is kind of related to your video on Gargantuanism, that this kind of flotilla, if you lose it, big deal, you build another one. Is not really is like the idea, like you fight with what you can afford to lose.
Yes, exactly. And the U.S. is already in other areas moving in that direction.
So that was the thing that I have to present. So do we have any question and comment from the viewers?
The only comment that I see that probably you would be interested in dealing with is the NREB. If a ship is stationary, then an H missile can target it. H missiles are easily detected. Carriers move. H missiles cannot track due to plasma effect.
Yes, but this I kind of explained a bit earlier in the video, that you can actually achieve terminal tracking with hypersonic missile. There's two ways. You can use certain radar, optimize the radar band so that it can go through the plasma, so that you can achieve cellular tracking, or you can disrupt the plasma and allow your ship-based tracker to take snapshot and achieve terminal tracking. And also this idea that if a hypersonic missile cannot hit a target at hypersonic speed is kind of pointless, because why build a hypersonic missile for it to become a supersonic missile? You know what I mean?
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, you're gonna pay. It become like an overcosted supersonic missile. I think a lot of this come from the fact that the first hypersonic missile attempt, the Pershing II, was not able to achieve tracking through the plasma blackout, because at the time the radar technology haven't developed enough to enable it to do that. But that's like during the Cold War, so technology has advanced quite a lot since then.
Well, I think that's all we have from the audience, and I think you've done a very good job of explaining the details of all this.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Rainlord. Where can people find you?
Like I said, I'm available on Twitter. If anyone have any additional question to ask, they can send me a private message. I will be or they can write a post to me, and I will be a pleasure to explain some of the technical detail and hypersonic missile or any other subject.
All right. Well, thank you again, Rainlord. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.